try. No hell below us, above us.
Good afternoon. It is Thursday. It is episode 199 of Volunteer for Israel's Educates. And we are delighted today, or unhappy today, depending on how you look at things, to get together with our group. We do this every third Thursday of the month, and the login that you use to get here today will also work 1 month from now and 2 months from now. So the VFI tiny URL, VFI Educates 4, is a constant, and you can invite anybody you want to join with us at our presentations. Today is a special presentation for very, very poor reasons, and we're going to proceed nonetheless. I have a couple of very quick things to talk about. Then Ilana is going to bring us update on certain Volunteer for Israel matters, and then we'll proceed with our presentation. And we're hoping that Lieutenant Colonel Shai Shol can join us. He is on active duty as a executive member of the medical staff within for the IDF. So we understand if he's not here today. Two observations that the war has created. One is that it's awoken the American diaspora, particularly the Jewish diaspora. And the second observation.
I can't seem to get sound. Is there some trick here?
Please try to stay muted.
Yeah. Well, let me mention the structure of how we're going to do this. When we get into our presentation part, we'll try to withhold questions until we get to the question and answer part. After the whole presentation is done today, which will be about an hour, you're welcome to stick around and we schmooze for as many hours as you want. And many people will stay around because we talk about all subjects on the table. But at the moment here, let's get started where we are. I just want to mention two things. One is the concept that the American Jewish community has sort of woken up. And the second is that it appears as though the Haredi group within Israel has gotten far more active on the militaristic side of things, which is contrary to their history. Daniel might want to talk about that. That to me is remarkable. In terms of history, let us not forget that this is the 5th Gaza war in 15 years. Wow. Okay. Hamas took over Gaza in 2006. In 2008, we had something called Cast Lead, first war. In 2012, we had something called Pillars of Defense, second war. In 2014, we had Protective Edge. In 2021, we had Guardian of the Wall. And here we are, the 5th one. Doesn't have a title that I'm aware of yet, but we've been here before. I'm sure it has a title. We'll hear about it. So I just wanted to mention that just to put a little perspective into the conversation. I'm going to ask Ilana now if she can't give us a quick rundown on VFI activities.
Sure. So as you can imagine, there's a bit of a balagan over there in terms of there's so many people wanting to go and volunteer, and that's what we do at VFI. I've been on the phone with, I would say, 40 to 50 people a day since the email went out asking for more volunteers. As of right now, there are 300 active volunteers on the ground helping in Israel. If you're interested in volunteering, I will say that there is probably a 4 to 5 week time period where they have to, do background checks, get your application, walk you through the whole thing, interview you and everything if you have not volunteered before. But I also want to mention that there's not much room on these bases because they've had to call up so many reservists. So most of the beds are taken. So if you had already signed up and you're accepted, you're going to go when they say, but they're not taking any new volunteers until November. But if you wanted to help Israel, please do not worry that you cannot get there now if you can't get in now, because the next time we really need you is, God willing, when this whole thing is over, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Ilana, December.
December. What did I say?
You said November. December.
Okay, December. Thank you, Bonnie. Sorry, I'm not sleeping that well either. What was I saying? Oh, so we need people to help volunteer after the war because all the soldiers kind of throw their stuff down and all the bases are a bit of a mess and we have to kind of get them ready for whatever is next. But if you are interested, please go on VFI's website, go to contacts, find your regional manager and contact that regional manager. They're the one who can walk you through the whole process. I know my name and my phone number are on that email, but all I'm going to tell you to do is to contact them. So you can easily bypass me and just go straight onto the website if you're interested. We thank anyone who wants to volunteer in any way. If you're looking for a place to give, I know Pam has a wonderful place that we've been donating to, and I'm sure she'd be happy to share that with you. But I'm sure a lot of us know various organizations that can help. We had 2 trips that were going to go, actually October and November. They're obviously not going because part of those trips were touring and we can't tour during a war. But I would just say, however you can, if we can't volunteer in Israel, speak up, post on social media, have conversations with people in a way that can make some understand what's actually happening over there instead of the fake information that they're getting on the news or from the New York Times. Go to rallies, whatever you can do to kind of show your support for Israel would be great. That's it for VFI updates. Steve, do you want me to introduce Daniel, or Pam? Did you want to do it?
Yeah, let me just show one other thing, then we'll ask Pam to introduce Daniel. That's okay. The thing I wanted to show you was an article just appeared written by Mark Werner, who is the recent past president of Volunteers for Israel. And I just put it up on the screen. If you go to chat, you'll see the URL that you can read it. The article, and that's Mark in a APC in Israel. He is actually in an airplane right now, along with a couple of other VFI executives on their way to Israel. And this is the extent of his article. It's quite lengthy. It goes on and on. I just wanted to point it out. You can get your own access to it. Just go to chat, and the URL is there. Okay, Pamela, can we ask you to introduce? Go ahead.
Wait, okay. All right. So many of you have heard Dan speak before. Dan made Aliyah in what year, Dan? About 10 years ago?
2011. So
Okay.
almost bar mitzvah.
Okay, 12, 13 years ago. And he's from Chicago, which is where I'm from, but I did not know him in Chicago. He came to Israel having made Aliyah. And of course, as many people do when they first come to Israel and don't have anything else to do, he joined Sarel. So he was a Sarel volunteer for several years on and off until he found his place in Israel. After that, he did numerous things, such as one small job that he had, which we were very happy at the time. He was working at the Ilan Institute, which is the bullet factory. Many of you have been there. And so it made it very easy when I had to organize groups to go there, because all I had to do was call up Dan and say, okay, I want my group to come. And it was nice and easy. After that, he started Playboy Israel. And that was very, very nice for a couple years. And then he was the CEO for HonestReporting for several years. And now he has started a new organization called RealityCheck, which he will tell you about. Besides all of those things, besides RealityCheck right now, he speaks on numerous television shows. He's interviewed. He's part of a debates when debates are going on, such as I-24, frequent speaker on I-24, as well as other Israeli news shows and various shows, different shows around the world. He just did something on Russian TV, which I'm sure he'll talk about. He's done interviews and speaking engagements on U.S. television, and he's very, very in demand for various engagements, and that's it. So he can now talk to you and give his presentation. Daniel?
Well, thank you, Pamela, and thank you, Steve, for inviting me. You know, people, the first thing people always ask is, how are you? So I'll give you the answer because I imagine you guys are all curious, to ask someone in Israel, how are you doing? I live in Tel Aviv, so I'm not sort of in the thick of it, but and I'm safe so far. But the psychological impact really does affect everybody. Everybody knows somebody who's been killed or captured. I have friends who have been to multiple funerals. And of course, we tend to be hearing sirens and going to our bomb shelters several times each day. So that takes its toll. And, Steve had said, we've been here before. That's kind of true and it's kind of not. I mean, Hamas has always been a threat, and there have been a number of operations. Some of those operations were officially termed wars. Some were officially termed operations. But what we saw this week, I don't think any of us have been here before. I mean, even the people who remember the early days of Israel when we fought the War of Independence in Yom Kippur in 1967, we were fighting against militaries who had a military goal, which was to take land. I don't think we've actually experienced something of this particular character since the Holocaust. The Holocaust had two major differences. One, the scale was very large, although certainly here they intended to make it on a large scale. But the other important difference is that now we have a country and we have an army of our own. And so they are not going to succeed in their goal. They succeeded in one effort, in one sucker punch, but they're not going to succeed in their goal, which is to do that to all Jews in the world. So that's kind of where we are right now. The atmosphere here is a strange mixture of normal and not, because it's a little bit like COVID. People aren't going outside quite as much, but at the same time, it's also there. I had a coffee in a coffee shop today, so the coffee shops are starting to open up again in Tel Aviv, and there are people who are out there. And in fact, just recently, they took a lot of the displaced people from the south. They're putting people from those areas that are really getting bombarded, or certainly people from the areas that had been attacked. They can't stay down there now. And so some of them are right over here outside my house. And it's really adorable. I don't know if you can hear them out there in the background, but there's kids playing, and then they're so joyful because kids just always find joy in whatever they're doing. And there's been, the other day, a dance troupe came by and taught people to dance. And the Omri Caspi, the famous basketball player, came by and gave all the kids basketballs. And they're doing makeup sessions and guitar lessons and all these things. And it really makes you feel a part of Israel to look out your window and see that people from elsewhere are here and people from here are coming to help them. And, as hard as it is to be here, there is one really big advantage, which is that we've got community. And as dangerous as it is and as scary as it is, I think I would rather be in a bomb shelter with supportive Israelis than to be on the streets of a city like Chicago or New York, seeing people wave swastikas or shout in praise of Hamas. It's an uncomfortable thing, and I really feel for all the Jews in the diaspora who are facing some real uncomfortable feelings right now. I'll catch you guys up on a little bit of news. The first thing I'd like to do is I'll share a video with you. Steve mentioned and Pamela mentioned that I was on Russian state television. As you know, Russian state television is not very friendly to Israel, nor do they have much scruples about things like truth and reality. And normally on these news shows, even when I debate, I find a way to be very polite and elegant, maybe a little bit snarky sometimes, still clear and firm. But in this particular case, I let down the facade a little bit and showed some genuine emotion, just a little bit, while still keeping everything I said focused on, based in fact that I could support. And normally with a journalist, I make it a rule to not make it personal. I won't say you're a terrible person. I'll say you made a terrible report. But in this case, I wasn't shy to tell the reporter on air just what I thought of his professionalism and his morality. So with that said, I'm going to pull this up here. This is a highlight reel. The segment was actually 10 minutes long, so this is just a highlight reel of some of the highlights from it. And let's see if I can get this right here. Let's see. Are you seeing a blue screen now?
You're
Yes.
good.
Yes? Okay. Oh, and tell me if you hear this. If you don't hear this, I might have to go back and adjust the sound here. But did you hear it? No. Okay.
Oh.
So here's what I have to do. I think I have to stop the share. I have to share screen again, and I have to click on. There we go. Share sound.
For sound, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Now you guys see RealityCheck's Daniel Pomerantz? All right. So let's give this a shot.
Of so many Gaza civilians. What is Tel Aviv's response to all of this?
Well, first of all, the capital of Israel is Jerusalem. So the correct phrasing is, what is Jerusalem's response to this? And the response is that Israel never intentionally targets civilians. I'm going to repeat that. Israel never, ever intentionally targets civilians. For decades, Hamas, which is recognized as a terror organization by almost every country in the Western world, has been thoroughly integrating its military machine with the civilian infrastructure. This is the largest loss of Jewish life in a single day since the Holocaust. And we cannot allow the organization that did this to have the resources to do even more, which they are trying to every day, every hour, even as we speak.
All right. From latest reports, it is said that there can't be authentic confirmation of the issue of the attack on babies and the killing of babies for now, from every report that we're getting. But the point that the leadership of Israel has said that the country is respecting international law in this conflict. How does the statement fare against the backdrop of the total blockade of Gaza and the constant shelling of civilians?
Well, the murder of all those babies is very much confirmed, and it is irresponsible to say otherwise. We have photographs, we have bodies, we have medical personnel, and not to mention that we know about these things the same way we know about the atrocities of the Nazis, because just like the Nazis, Hamas has been photographing them and bragging about them to the world. There's literally nobody who is saying this is not true except outside parties with an agenda. Now, I want to correct something. You said that Israel is shelling civilians. I don't know if you have some evidence that Israel has intentionally targeted a civilian. I don't know if you have some source, but I believe you don't, because Israel is not intentionally targeting civilians. To say so is irresponsible and a discredit to the profession of journalism. And I believe you should be rather ashamed of yourself for saying that. Israel is not intentionally targeting civilians, but is working to destroy Hamas infrastructure. When Hamas puts a rocket launcher in a child's bedroom, that is a war crime. And I don't hear criticism coming from you about that. I also didn't hear your channel saying that Hamas had committed war crimes when they killed over 1,000 people and raped several hundred women, which is also clearly a war crime. So it's inappropriate to use the term only now and not then, but it is highly inappropriate to use the term when you do not have a source or evidence to support it. Israel never, ever, ever intentionally targets civilians. Hamas frequently and consistently puts their own civilian population in harm's way in order to produce a situation exactly like this. Anyone who genuinely cares about Palestinians must be opposing Hamas. Anyone who cares about Israelis must be opposing Hamas. There are no sides here. This is not Israelis versus Palestinians. This is people who believe in peace versus people who believe in death.
Yeah, what I was trying to talk about earlier was the issue of the babies that we've mentioned. The point there is the United States leadership has retracted the issue of the narrative around the babies. And that's what I was saying. There is no evidence anywhere that babies were being killed. And that's what I was drawing attention to.
That's simply incorrect. The United States is looking for the exact numbers, but they have not retracted the story. And the idea that there is no evidence is utterly preposterous. It is simply untrue. There is so much evidence. Now, if you want to talk about what you think of one piece of evidence or another, you can say, well, I don't believe the aid workers or the photographs of the bodies. You could say that. But to say that that evidence doesn't exist is simply incorrect, and it's not journalism.
I'm seeing some hands. Thank you, guys. I wish I could be there with you and actually experience your response firsthand. But yeah, that was me on Russian state television. It's not always quite as heated as that, depending who you're talking to and what they're saying. A lot of my job lately has been, we've been putting out a lot of content. We've been doing interviews as much as we can, or as much as people ask us to. We just got contacted by the South African Jewish community, which is very much under fire, and I mean, metaphorically speaking, not literally under fire the way we are here. But, in one of the recent wars, they reached out to me and had me on South African television a lot because they didn't have a spokesperson. And so the Jewish community put me forward as the spokesperson via Zoom for their community. And they just contacted me the other day, and it looks like we're going to do it again. And as you may know, South Africa is very not friendly to Israel, and to be Jewish there at a time like this is not so easy. Another thing that we're doing is advising Israeli leadership on how to do their messaging, how to speak correctly to an American audience. And that is not always an easy job, partly because the culture out here in the Middle East is a little different, partly because Israelis sort of have this endearing, lovely, but sometimes annoying habit of thinking that they know everything. And in one case, I'll give you a good example. The other day, this is an example of something that I was not involved in, but probably should have been. The energy minister in Israel made a statement that we will not let any aid go to Gaza civilians, not one bit of electricity, not one drop of water, until the hostages return. Well, that doesn't sound good to American ears. It actually sounds pretty good to, it's actually not a bad message in the Arab world, because in that framing, in that context, it shows a degree of confidence, of fierceness, of the kind of strong qualities that are respected in the Arab world. And in that sense, it may have actually been a positive statement for an Arab audience to hear. It may possibly move things in a positive direction, maybe. But it absolutely was not the sort of thing to be saying in English to Americans, especially when there's so many other ways you could say it. For example, you could point out that there is no way to safely move humanitarian aid into Gaza because the various entrances to Gaza that used to be used for that, Hamas blew all of them up on October 7th as part of their attacks. You could point out that Hamas is so closely integrated into the infrastructure of the civilian population that there is no way to provide civilian aid that won't also go to the Hamas military machine. And another point, though, is, and this is just the point he was trying to get at, which is he could have phrased differently, is that if you provide aid to Palestinian civilians in Gaza without releasing the Israeli hostages, you are in effect treating Palestinian civilians and Israeli civilians differently, and that is unacceptable. And so he could have said it in any number of these ways, which is rather which would be much more palatable to American audiences. I see somebody mentioning that quote from Golda Meir about which essentially comes down to, I don't care what people think of me, I'm going to do the right thing. I want to be clear. I'm not saying we shouldn't do the right thing. We should do the right thing, whatever that takes. But while we're doing the right thing, maybe we could also speak about it in the right way for the right audience. If we're doing the right thing, we should let people know that we're doing the right thing. And we should say it in a language that they understand. And the irony of all this is that foreign aid is going to be flowing into Gaza shortly anyway, because Prime Minister Netanyahu ended up agreeing to do that. So we ended up making the statement that makes us look bad, and it's not even something we're doing in the end. So these are the sort of challenges I go through with Israel. The mission comes first. The mission, whether that means the hostages, whether that means destroying Hamas, the mission comes first. But in a very close second comes talking about the mission in a way that works for the world. You may have noticed there's 2 U.S. aircraft carriers in the Eastern Mediterranean right now, as well as British troops there too. There's a reason for that. We believe that Iran is involved in what's going on. We know that Iran has threatened to attack Israel. There's not there isn't confirmation, but there are rumors that China and Russia may be involved in some various ways. We think of Israel as being very strong. Israel is strong on self-defense, but to fight major powers like Iran and China and Russia in a multi-front war, that's not something Israel's equipped for. That's why Israel has allies. And that's why aircraft carriers are in the Mediterranean right now, as a show of force, as a show of deterrence, to prevent anyone from even thinking about expanding this into a global war. And if somebody does not take that deterrence seriously, then those aircraft carriers will be put to use. that really is critical for Israel's safety and survival. But we've got to remember, America is a democracy. Democracies respond to what the population says and thinks. That's how you get into power in a democracy. That's how you stay in power in a democracy. And what people say and think comes back to information. And if people hear the wrong information, such as that Israel blew up a hospital, then people's opinions are going to change. And when people's opinions change, the actions and decisions of the leadership starts to change. And then you can say goodbye to those aircraft carriers and say hello to direct attacks from countries all over the world. So the point is, communication and messaging is a security priority. The soldiers are out there fighting, and that's a priority. But you know what? The soldiers aren't going to be doing much fighting if Israel's been pulled into The Hague for war crimes, or if we lose all of our allies, or, there are any number of things that could make the soldiers' job more difficult or even impossible. And that's where we come in on the side of communications. And my special contribution as an Ole Chadash, even though I'm not such a new Ole anymore, I'm more of an old Ole, but my special contribution is my understanding of the part of the world that I came from. And I have friends who come from other parts of the world who contribute that understanding in their own way. I want to show you something a little bit light here. I was debating whether to show this because my circumstances are so less dire than those of many other people. But I wanted to show you this sort of personal video because people are always curious about bomb shelters. And I'm sure some of you have been in Israel at a time of sirens, but many of you maybe haven't. So I'm going to show you this little clip here that gives you kind of a sense of what it's like when the siren sounds and we go to the bomb shelter. And I'll keep in mind, this is not me trying to play victim or anything. I actually, from Tel Aviv, we get 90 seconds to get to the bomb shelter. That's how long it takes a rocket to get from Gaza over to here. There's a sophisticated radar system that sees the rocket and sees its trajectory and then sounds sirens in the right part of the country right away. Thanks to that, we have 90 seconds, but people in places like Sderot have 15 seconds. That's 1-5. 15 seconds is just enough time for you to pick one of your kids if they happen to be standing in different parts of the room. So that's a terrible Sophie's Choice situation. It's not one that I'm in. So I will show you, this is what it's like when you're going to a bomb shelter in Tel Aviv. Does everyone see a picture of me looking with a silly look on my face here? All right. All right, we've got a siren going now. And this one is quite loud. You can really hear it out here. So I'm going to stop taking foolish risks here and go to the bomb shelter. Just going to throw my sandals on here. And I'm going to take you with me so you get to experience it again. Here we go. So first I'm heading out my door. And now you can see where I'm walking here. We're going to walk over down the hallway. The sirens are continuing to sound. We're going to go over here into this area. Here we have, this is basically the stairwell, which is already a little bit safer. And then we head just down a few steps of stairs, and here is the bomb shelter. So you can come on in it with me. And in the bomb shelter, we have neighbors and friends and dogs. So everyone's waving hello. Sure. What? Say hello. How do you enjoy being in a bomb shelter? Not very. That's life. That's life. That's life. So and here we have some dogs.
What's up?
This is Bobby, my neighbor, and these are these adorable dogs, and they're just hanging out. So thanks for joining me in the bomb shelter. Stay safe, everyone. Oh, we hear booms going on outside right now. Yeah. That's serious. So that's what we do a few times a day. It's a nice way to get to know your neighbors. It was really cute. A friend of mine has kids who are, around like 10, 12 years old, and her daughter just had a bat mitzvah in Israel. And the kids were really worried, what happens to the dogs during an air raid siren? And, there's something, and they were so comforted to see my video with the dogs in it. So they know that the dogs are in the shelter. There's something really sweet about like just seeing the world through the mind of children and the things that they notice and care about. It kind of, I don't know, in a way kind of reminds you of what's important in life. And speaking of children, I also want to show you this. This is just a little clip that I took off my balcony looking out at the displaced people from the south who are now up here. And the other day, they were doing some sort of a dance workshop with them. And so I got just a few minutes of that. And let's take a look at that here. That's just kind of a nice little clip. And I don't know if you noticed the guy over here in the orange vest, that's Picud HaOref, which is Home Front Command. They sometimes take Sarel groups, so you might have volunteered with them. And at one point later, he started actually getting into it and dancing around. And so it's really sweet. We have all these Home Front Command people over here in my neighborhood just to kind of take care of the people who are displaced and make sure they have what they need. And because I served in Sarel, I know certain clues. Like, for example, I noticed most of the Picud HaOref people aren't armed. Some of them are, but they're not in like full combat gear. So they're not really there for security. And I noticed the gun that they have is the extra long M16. It's and I've learned from Sarel that that's the one you give to young recruits, and it's extra long and extra heavy. So it's kind of a hazing thing. You haze them by giving them the gun that's heavier and harder to carry. And it's mostly just to get them used to carrying a gun. So you do see people in uniform with guns here, but because I've been in Sarel, I know that they're not really there for security. They're just there to get hazed. They have to carry guns around. Things have been not great in the news. Israel had its moment of being a victim for a day. And of course, everybody loves a victim, but that's not going to last. We're heading very soon toward a ground invasion, and it's going to be difficult, especially for you guys. What happened the other day, Tuesday night, Palestinian Islamic Jihad was firing these rockets at Israel. I was going to the bomb shelter as they were doing that, as usual. One of the rockets misfired and hit a hospital. And before anyone even bothered to get any kind of confirmation other than the unreliable word of the Hamas organization, there were headlines plastered everywhere that an Israeli strike has destroyed a hospital and killed 500 people. And Israel came forward within hours, which is really impressive. Israel did not do this in the past, but they came forward with just a mountain of evidence showing that this was not the case. And then the headlines had to change. The thing is, though, next time Israel might not have all that evidence. Next time it might not be a rocket. It might be something else that's not as easy to track with radars. And particularly in a ground invasion, there's going to be a lot of people dying in Gaza. Some of them will be innocent people. Most of them will be dying because of Hamas or other terror groups. Some of them may die because Israel made a mistake. That can happen too. Some may die because Israel made a difficult choice to target a piece of military infrastructure, notwithstanding the fact that there are civilians nearby, because it's that important to target it. This is all going to happen. And so I want to give you guys a little bit of I have an article that's coming out in the Allgemeiner that kind of goes through this, but I'll just give you just a little rundown of what's going to be coming your way and the way to think it through. I don't necessarily want to tell you what to say, but if I can tell you something about how to think about it, that might help you find what to say in your own words, because everyone is an ambassador to your own community, to your own social media, to wherever you are. We all have a role to play. So as you know, on October 7th, there was this horrible attack, 1,300 men, women, children, and elderly killed, hundreds of rapes, the beheading or burning alive of some 40 babies, capturing of some 150 hostages. But what a lot of people don't know is Hamas since then has launched hundreds of additional attempted invasions by sea, land, and air, which the IDF has stopped. This is an actual attempt at a real full-scale genocide of the entire state of Israel. And they're not going to succeed, but they are certainly trying to. The operation right now by Israel is with the intention of removing Hamas as a military force, as an actor in the region. It is not about revenge. It is not about punishment. It is about removing Hamas as a force that has the ability to act at all. Now, there's two issues that are going to come up here. One is proportionality, and the other is going to be the conversation around civilian casualties and truth and reliability. So with proportionality, some of you may know I'm a recovering lawyer. The first step is admitting that you are a lawyer, and I'm as a recovering lawyer or a former lawyer, I have a lot of tendency to think about things in a legal way, which is sometimes very useful. So people throw around the word proportionality, but a lot of times they don't really know what it means. People say it as if it meant that Israel's response should be similar to the attack. But when you think about it, nobody believes that. I mean, if that were so, then Israel's response should be to murder 1,300 civilians and behead 40 babies and rape a few hundred women. Clearly, that's not what anybody thinks is the appropriate response. So then what is a proportional response? Well, according to Article 51 of the Geneva Convention, as well as a number of other sources of international law, Article 51 of the Additional Protocol to the Geneva Convention, but it's listed in a number of different places in international law. Proportional basically means that the military action has to be proportional to the relevant threat. There's a technical language is that the harm to civilian life or infrastructure must not be excessive in relation to the military objective. But basically what that means is it has to be proportional to the threat that you're facing. So for example, after 9/11, the very existence of Al-Qaeda was a threat to American safety. Not because the terror group had launched this one attack, but because the terror group was committed to carrying out more attacks and to causing harm to the Western world and to destroying entire countries. The attack on 9/11 merely demonstrated that the group had the capacity to carry it out successfully, but that intent to do more was what made their very existence a threat. So the proportional response was to put an end to Al-Qaeda. What did that take? That took about a decade of fighting in multiple countries around the world. That was not proportional in relationship to the events of 9/11, which was some 3,000 casualties and 1 day of attacks on 3 places. But it was proportional to the threat that America was facing, and that's what proportionality is. So in this case, we are facing a Nazi-based organization. Hamas is a Nazi-based organization. That's not my opinion. That's their opinion. They idolize Adolf Hitler. They use Nazi symbols, including the swastika. They use Nazi ideology in their training, and it's in their founding charter. And the best way to express this, really, I couldn't have said it better myself, are the words of President Biden. He said, Hamas does not stand for the Palestinian people's right to dignity and self-determination. Its stated purpose is the annihilation of the state of Israel and the murder of the Jewish people. That is what Israel is facing, an organization that wishes to commit that kind of destruction, and they are trying to do it, and they've already demonstrated that they have real capacity. So just like after 9/11, destroying Hamas is the proportional response. Now, what this requires, what this involves, actually depends entirely on Hamas. For example, if the group were to get so intimidated by Israel's call-up of reservists and preparation for an escalation, they could surrender, return the hostages, turn all their leadership in for arrest and war crimes trials. And this whole matter would end with no further loss of life. Israel is not seeking revenge. If Hamas were to surrender tomorrow, Israel would not be going out to try and kill people just for the sake of doing it. But that's not likely to happen. Hamas has shown no such intention. It's deeply entrenched in the Palestinian civilian infrastructure. It is well trained and well armed. And although I haven't heard official confirmation, I've heard unofficially that a good deal of their training has come from Iran. So they are being trained with the resources of a nation state. Therefore, the proportional response is eliminating Hamas, and that is going to require a significant amount of fighting with Israeli and Palestinian civilians frequently caught in between. Even if this were to grow into some world war, let's say Iran started to get involved directly and the United States responded by using the aircraft carriers to counter Iran. Now suddenly we're in a multinational war. Is that disproportionate compared to what happened on October 7th? No, because the proportionality is to the threat that Israel is facing, not to the particular events that happen. And of course, the escalation and growth and the amount of fighting that is going to be required to resolve this at this point depends entirely on Hamas, who absolutely has the ability to put an end to this right away. I mean, that end would also involve an end to their leadership. Now, the next thing that we face is the numbers game. As you know, Hamas, when I say Hamas is a terror organization, that's not my opinion. That's the official designation of the United States and the European Union and the UK and Canada and Australia and Japan and New Zealand and Egypt, and the list goes on and on. And of course, that can be an important thing to say when people, object. Well, I don't think they're terrorists. It's like, oh, it's just not about what you think or what I think. This is how they are designated by most of the world. So this terror organization, the Gaza Ministry of Health, is simply an arm of Hamas. So when you see the news quote the Gaza Ministry of Health, what they're quoting is a terror organization that has a history of... I'm sorry, I thought there was a siren for a moment. Turned out it was just a car's engine revving. That's a common phenomenon here in Israel. The beginning of the siren, which kind of goes up with a whoosh, like whoo, it sounds a lot like a car starting. And so frequently you'll hear you'll hear a car revving its engine, and someone like me will stop and go, wait, what? By the way, I'll apologize in advance if I stand up and leave you without any excuse. That means I'm in a bomb shelter. But if I am, I'll be back in just a few minutes. So the Gaza Ministry of Health is a part of a terror organization. It's basically like quoting ISIS as if it were a reliable source. It's obviously not. And it's unreliable in four specific ways. Causality, its propensity to lie, human shields, and of course its own credibility. So the credibility is the fact that they are a terror organization with a history of inaccuracy. It's like quoting ISIS. It's not that what they say is always necessarily wrong, but a person should get confirmation before believing it. The causality, about 30% to 30% of Hamas's rockets misfire and kill Palestinian civilians. So what we saw Tuesday night is not a new phenomenon. It's this phenomenon of misfires killing Palestinian civilians is confirmed by many organizations outside of Israel. And of course, last night's example is just one more, and there will be many more examples like that. And Israel might not always have the mountain of evidence ready as it did this time. Second is outright lies. Hamas frequently will just lie. And so one example is again, back to Tuesday night. After Tuesday night, Hamas responded by saying, well, that Israel had done it, even though they knew that Palestinian Islamic Jihad had fired the rocket which hit that hospital. And this is not a new thing. In 2018, I don't know if you remember this, the news media around the world was just on fire with these claims that Israel had killed an 8-month-old Palestinian baby. Her name was Layla Gandour. As it came out later, she had a congenital heart condition and had died from that. And she was nowhere near any Israeli forces at the time that happened. But it took a while for that to come out. But the point is, these are just two examples of an ongoing practice by Hamas of telling lies. And then finally, there's the human shields aspect. Hamas systematically integrates its military machine with the Palestinian civilian infrastructure. You can find command centers in schools and mosques, rocket launchers in private homes, or as we saw Tuesday night, in hospitals or next to hospitals. And the list goes on and on. And of course, even when Israel warns in advance of attack, oftentimes Hamas will prevent people from leaving, as in this case, they've been preventing Palestinian civilians from leaving Gaza City, despite Israel's encouragement for them to leave. And of course, well, I don't know if you've heard about this. There have been reports, I can't give official confirmation, but there have been reports that along the evacuation route from Gaza City, there have been explosions that were not from the IDF. To put another way, we have reason to believe Hamas is shelling its own civilians as they try to escape from Gaza City. Again, that's not confirmed, but this is the sort of situation that we're facing. The bottom line is, if you're talking to somebody who's pro-Palestinian, the point to make, or someone who's just sort of doesn't understand things well but wants everyone to live in peace, the point to make is that to be pro-Palestinian means to be anti-Hamas. It would be like saying, I'm pro-Syrians. I'm in favor. I want to support the Syrian people. So for that reason, I support ISIS. It obviously makes no sense. And it makes just as little sense to support Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, because they are not a positive force for the Palestinian people. They cause them a great deal of harm. And, a lot of the reason that we don't have a Palestinian state right now, aside from the fact that Israel's made some 9 offers that they always got rejected, but there's also the security concerns. The reason that there are fences and border crossings and checkpoints and all these things is precisely because of threats like Hamas. Eliminating Hamas, this war that we're facing right now, will very likely end with Hamas eliminated. It will end with Iran weakened, and it will end with Israel in a much safer place. Now, between now and then, many Israelis are going to die, or I should say many more. And so this isn't good news for any individual Israeli, but for Israel as a whole, this is going to end in a place that is better than where it started. And that's good news for Palestinians too, because if Israel is safer, then that means less need for some of the security measures, more openness to taking risks regarding Palestinian statehood and independence. What people don't realize is that the path to Palestinian statehood and independence runs through weakening and eliminating groups like Hamas, not strengthening them, and certainly not supporting them or talking about their side of the story as if they represented a legitimate second side. So that's my update of what has happened, more or less. I haven't gone into all the news. I think you've probably gotten more than enough of it. That's my forecast for what's going to happen and some of the concepts you're going to face as people who speak in your communities in the days and weeks to come. And if you want my estimation of how long this is going to last, the last time we had anything even close to this was 2014, and that lasted 52 days. So, and I think the scale of this is expected to be even more than that. This is the first time that Israel has officially stated a strategic goal of eliminating Hamas. In the past, the goal was always to restore calm, restore deterrence, ceasefire, things like that. Now the stated goal is different. And because the stated goal is different, and because the stated goal is one that requires a ground invasion and a significant amount of fighting, I'd say that what we saw in 2014 is the baseline. It will be at least 50 days, probably more. Now, what works in our favor is that the technology's gotten better since then, and Israeli intelligence and training has gotten better. But Hamas has also become more fully integrated with Iran since then. So I would say we're looking at least at several months of fighting to come. That's what I have. And with that, I'll be happy to take questions.
Wow, that's terrific. Thank you. There are a number of questions in the chat box. Pamela, have you been watching that? Sorry, Ilan. Ilana, have you been watching it?
Yeah, sure. I can ask some questions.
Yeah, why don't you run through the chat box?
Sure. Let me make sure I get to the first one.
Yeah.
So what about... Sorry, Steve?
Go ahead. Sorry.
What about the building in the Netherlands that is lit up with Palestinian colors? What happens to the Palestinian people that do not want to be under Hamas? It's from Robin.
There's going to be protests around the world. Some Palestinians don't want to live under Hamas, and there were some significant protests against Hamas in recent months. But for the most part, it's not a free country. It's like saying, well, why don't we hear people? It's like the old joke. You ask somebody, hey, how's life in the Soviet Union? And the guy answers, can't complain. And that's sort of the reality of living under any non-free society. On the other hand, it's also true that there are many Palestinians who do support Hamas, whether because they're brainwashed or they just don't understand, or because they actually think that Hamas is going to defeat Israel and lead them to a glorious victory in which they'll live in what used to be Israeli homes. So you kind of get all types. So what about them? It's not one-dimensional, but I do think that if we can build a world in which Palestinians have the opportunity to get a more well-rounded view of the world, and also the ability to speak up about that view without fear for their safety, then we have a much greater chance of everybody living in peace.
Great. Arnie's asking, what about the tunnels?
We haven't heard much talk about them. I assume it's because Israel has done such a thorough job of creating, I think they called it Iron Spade, like a spade that digs, and like the opposite of Iron Dome, because Iron Dome goes up and Iron Spade goes down underground. They've done a lot of work in terms of tracking tunnels with all sorts of technology and putting in measures to block them. I'm sure it's still an issue. I'm sure there are people focused on it, but we haven't heard a lot of talk about it lately. But one thing I am sure of is that when Israeli soldiers go in as a ground invasion, that place is just littered with booby traps of all sorts, including the tunnel type and other types too. And we have to have a bit of humility here. Israel will win, but individual Israelis are going to get killed and possibly captured.
And then Robin followed up with, why can't they just flood the tunnels?
Well, first you have to find them, and then, you can figure out what to do. Flooding is not always necessarily the most efficient thing to do. Sometimes they detonate them with explosives. Sometimes they leave them open so that they can track who's coming and going. Sometimes, they just keep an eye on them. So there's a lot you can do, but the first step is to find them. It's not like you can just pour a bunch of water over all of Gaza and then the tunnels fill up. It's like you have to find them, and then you have to take some measure to destroy them. And whatever measure is the most efficient is the one that they use.
And as a follow-up to that, are we concerned that there's hostages in the tunnel? And then also, what is Israel doing about the hostages in Gaza in terms of bombing and getting what we need to get there?
That's an area where Israel has not been sharing a lot of information. We don't know what Israel knows. And we don't know what Israel's planning to do. Obviously, the best outcome is a special forces rescue operation. But I think what Hamas was hoping for was to do some sort of what they were hoping for, I believe, is that it would be a Gilad Shalit type situation in which, they got the impression from the Gilad Shalit incident that Israel will do absolutely anything the moment you have a hostage. And I think they thought that they would carry this out. There'd be a few days of fighting, but then they'd show videos of the hostages and Israel would just be stopped in its tracks. And obviously that's not what's happened. Israel's continuing its fighting, and the Israeli public is very much in support of that, because right now the Israeli public wants to see a world that ends up safer. And if bringing back the hostages means negotiating some sort of a deal in which we are in further danger of this happening again, that's not something at this point that the Israeli public would support. So in terms of Israel's operations, I don't know what they know, but I do know that they are not letting the existence of hostages stop them from carrying out the assaults that they need to right now.
I'm wondering, since this is the sixth go-around, what lessons were learned from the prior 5 ones, the 5 incursions in the past?
We've learned a great deal about. First of all, not all of the prior operations included a ground assault. Some did and some didn't. But what we have learned that we've learned to be humble. Israel is a superior fighting force compared to Hamas and the other groups there, but that doesn't mean Israel cannot be badly hurt. It's their turf. They have booby traps. They have all sorts of resources there, and they use their civilian population for PR benefits and attempt to get international pressure to make Israel stop the operations by doing that. So what Israel's learned is to be aware of all those things. Israel has a lot of precision information and uses it to carry out a lot of pinpoint strikes. But at the same time, Israel is and also in the last operation, there was fighting on the ground and in tunnels, and no Israeli troops got captured in that particular operation, which was surprising, very welcome, but it also shows that those sort of things don't just happen on their own. There must have been a tremendous amount of planning that prevented that from happening. So without knowing anything too behind the curtain, I can tell you that that Israel is very aware and doing very precise planning to counter these things.
Have you heard anything about Israel not sending troops into Gaza?
No, it's very clear that troops are going in. I mean, unless something changes. I got a notification just before this call started that the head of the Southern Command was just issuing a statement that we are about to go in. But we don't actually know the exact timeline. That depends on a couple things. It depends on the Air Force doing their work, because they have to sort of clear the ground and make it create a situation that's safe isn't the word, but safer for the troops to go in. And it also is a matter of the troops getting ready to go in. And by the way, this is something a lot of people don't know. We've seen a lot of pictures and heard stories of Israeli troops not having supplies, not having food. And the word has become the IDF doesn't have equipment, doesn't have what it needs. That's not the case. The IDF has equipment. The IDF has supplies. There are individual soldiers that don't have what they need because the reserves call-up was so fast and so large that they weren't able to get the logistics. You guys know about logistics, right? This is exactly what Sarah is all about. So the logistics were not able to move as fast as the reserves call-up. So even you had soldiers out in the middle of the desert, excuse me, with no food. That doesn't mean Israel doesn't have food. It just means the food and the supplies and the vests and all the equipment wasn't getting to where it needed to be quickly enough. But it's an important message to the world that Israel is a well-equipped and well-prepared army. And by the time by the time a ground assault begins, the logistics will have had a chance to catch up.
Yeah, the magic number I heard was 900,000 meals a day.
That sounds about right. The reserves call-up was 300,000, but there's also about 150,000 regular army. So I suppose if you assume that they eat an average of 3 meals a day each, that's the number would be something like that. Yeah, and it's funny, if you ever thought that you were any less important to the Israeli army than a special forces fighter, just remember that fighter can't fight on an empty stomach and can't fight without medical supplies and everything that you guys do. I should say that we do, because I was doing it too. Is right now being noticed as the most critical puzzle piece that's missing, not missing, but catching up. Right.
Why did Israel turn on the water and send in the food trucks without demanding the return of the hostages?
Well, first of all, I don't know that it's actually gone in yet. Israel's come to an agreement to do those things, but I don't think they've. But it takes time to organize it. Also, the border crossings that Israel used to use, Hamas blew them up on October 7th, so they have to find a new way of moving things in. Israel was making demands, but basically, you had the United States president came to Israel in the middle of a war. That's unprecedented. The British prime minister was in Israel today in the middle of a war. And, a presidential trip takes months of planning. Within just a few days, the president made the plans, got the security together, came in. I had a heck of a time trying to get to a place I was trying to go because the streets were closed for the motorcade. I know. You think people would be more considerate of my plans, but, the support of the world, there's two factors here. One is that the support of the world depends on Israel showing itself to be helpful in this way. And, it's making sure Palestinians have access to food and medical supplies and water it's not a bad thing to do. It's bad only in the sense that some of those resources will go to Hamas. Let's face it, Hamas doesn't care about its civilian population. We know that. So cutting off foreign aid and supplies to the civilian population was never going to get the hostages back. I mean, morally, it's the right thing to do. It's morally right to say, hey, you don't get to treat Jews differently than you treat Palestinians. That is the right moral thing to do. But as a practical level, cutting off that aid was never going to get the hostages back unless you honestly believe that Hamas cares, and you know that they don't. So Israel did something that provides it with no actual tactical disadvantage, while at the same time gaining support from around the world. And also, there is the issue of international law. You can't cut off supplies to a civilian population, even if it's for a purpose of bringing the hostages back. By the way, I'll say, and I say this as a lawyer, laws aren't always right. And I don't think international law as it's written was really designed with this situation in mind. Nonetheless, putting right and wrong aside, you don't want Israel to be openly and publicly committing what is technically a war crime while asking the world to support it. So I'd say overall, we're in a better position than we would have been by having this, and we're certainly no worse. By the way, I'll be happy to continue taking questions, but I just want to add one thing here. My organization, RealityCheck Research, is a 501c3 nonprofit. Right now, people are very excited about donating to the Magen David Adom, the ambulance services, to the IDF for supplies and war and things like that. But as I said before, messaging, including the things I'm telling you today, including the things I do on television, messaging is a security priority. We don't get any kind of budget from the government, and our work is tremendously important. And in order to continue it, we need support, just like every other cause does. So if you decide that that is something that's close to your heart and that you'd like to support, you can go to realitycheckresearch.org, all in one word. And I'm sure either Steve or Pamela will put it into the chat or send you an email later. And anything that you can do to help us, we really appreciate more than words can say. That being said, I'm going to go back to taking questions.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. I just put the website in the chat. A question from Harry. The U.S. used bunker bombs in the past. Will Israel use such weapons? Israel's support is slowly eroding. Will Israel be able to maintain support around the world, or is the degradation just to be expected?
Israel's support at the government level has not been degrading. Israel's support in the news, in the headlines, among people on the ground is degrading and is going to degrade even further. And, as I said before, if enough of that support on the civilian level degrades, then in a democracy that will begin to affect support at the government level. But it hasn't gone there yet. I don't know specifically about different munitions, but I know that the United States sent a supply of what they call advanced weaponry, whatever that means, to Israel recently. And of course has its own aircraft carriers in the region, partly because, and this is another thing you can say to Americans, depending on who your audience is and what's important to them, this isn't just an Israeli cause. This affects everybody in the world. This involves Iran. It involves probably China and Russia. It certainly involves terror groups that have all of the Western world in their crosshairs. And that's the reason why America is there. That's the reason why Britain is there. It's not because they want to look nice being, extending a helping hand. It's because this is an American interest. It's a British interest. It's about the safety of American and British people. We're all in this together.
Okay. David has a question. Also, I was wondering this too. As like the Palestinian people try to move south, a lot of members of Hamas might try to move south as well. How do we kind of weed them out and make sure we're not losing out on getting Hamas members who try to escape or move south?
Well, the main goal, in this military operation is to wipe out Hamas as an organization that has the ability to act. So a good example is Al-Qaeda. I'm sure even today there are some people somewhere in the world who claim to be Al-Qaeda, but as an organization, it no longer has the ability to act with any effect because it has been so massively eviscerated. So if Israel can destroy the infrastructure, target most of the leadership, get a large number of troops, you're eventually going to get to the point where if somebody, ends up somewhere, they're no longer part of an organization that has an ability to function. And that's the goal. And that is a goal that can be achieved even without getting every last individual person.
What happened in terms of like intelligence? Like why did intelligence not see this coming? Has that been released yet? That's a question from Robin.
That hasn't been released yet. And let me just say this: there are some reasons, and they're not ones that the government is talking about yet. And so, for that reason, I'm not going to talk about them yet either. But let me just say this: it's not just that people fell asleep at the wheel. It's not just that people didn't notice or didn't care. There are legitimate reasons, and the reasons are being dealt with.
Mark has his hand up, I see.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get through the ones in the chat before we open up to the group. What kind of pressure is Biden putting on Israel?
The only pressure, well, Biden's support has been, his statements have been unconditional. They've been just extremely supportive in exactly the right way. There weren't any buts in his statements. And, if you want to feel good, just pick up his speech and read it. And I've always said this, I don't support or oppose any individual politician or any party. I support and oppose actions and policies. And at this moment, President Biden is doing exactly the right actions and policies. He has said that Israel should not consider occupying Gaza. And, look, I don't think Israel particularly wants to occupy Gaza either. It then saddles Israel with the responsibility of policing this entire area and all the people in it. So he has said that, and that is some measure of pressure, I suppose. And then I would imagine that behind the scenes, part of the reason we're seeing the humanitarian aid begin to flow is probably Biden had said something to that effect. I would imagine that, he's coming and putting in this show of support for Israel, but Israel also has to do something to make him look good to the world. I would imagine there was a conversation like that.
Okay. I want to be conscious of your time. Are you okay if I keep asking questions from the chat?
Oh, I'm quite all right. By the way, before you go to another, I saw a question flash by on the screen. Someone said, I noticed on your website, it said that you're affiliated with Harvard. And isn't that, I forget the rest of it, but it's something like, isn't Harvard terrible? Yes, Harvard's pretty terrible. But our affiliation is that they invited us to speak. And my philosophy has always been that we go where we're needed. I mean, I'm happy to talk to you guys. It's wonderful. You guys end up going off and talking to your communities. But you guys, if I don't speak to you, you'll live and you'll still know what's going on with Israel. But if I go on Russian state television, if I go to Harvard's campus, that's where people really need to hear what we have to say, because it's exactly the people who don't know what you guys already know intuitively.
You're preaching to the choir here, and you're low-hanging fruit. We've got to get the higher ones.
Yeah.
Gal's asking, I read that Hamas has stolen food, fuel, water, etc. from the UN refugee supplies. In addition, from looking at videos of captured tunnels, the tunnels seem to be electrified and supplied with needed materials that are not being shared with Gazans. Why isn't Hamas asked to share their supplies with Gazans? Only Israelis are asked to do this.
Well, this has always been our feeling of, why do you ask us to do this and you don't ask them to do that? And it's a horribly unfair feeling. But let's all take a step back. There is a significant degree of consensus around the world right now that Hamas ought to be utterly destroyed. And at least at the national level, people aren't saying that about Israel. I mean, the people protesting in Times Square with swastikas might be saying that, but President Biden, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the Chancellor of Germany, all of them are in agreement that Hamas has to go. None of them are saying that about Israel. So in terms of why don't they talk about them the way they talk about us, I think on the whole, Israel is getting the better end of that conversation at the moment.
From Barry and Carol, we haven't seen any information from Honest Reporting. What's their status?
Well, I don't work for Honest Reporting anymore. I haven't in a couple of years. I can tell you that when I was there, my priority was to move us out of preaching to the choir and move us more into making a big difference. If we write an article that really has a lot of great points in it, that doesn't really mean anything unless the article gets into the right hands and has an impact in the world. And that's why I started RealityCheck, was I wanted to be in an environment where I have the ability to create impact and to carry it out in the way that I feel is necessary and important. So that's my priority and where I am right now. I can't speak to where Honest Reporting is at these days or what their priorities are, because I'm not there anymore and I don't speak for them anymore. But I can speak for where I am and why I am here. I wanted the freedom and independence and support to be able to really focus on doing work that has an impact. Just preaching to the choir is important too, because you guys deserve to have a briefing. But what I really want to do is be able to come back to you guys and say, here is what I have accomplished and why we can all be happy about it.
I do want to point out something that Pam said, because I want to second it. She wrote, when Dan spoke at Harvard, he spoke to students. They're the ones we all need to educate. I'm 41, and people my age and younger tend to be incredibly anti-Israel because they don't know anything about it. They don't care to know the facts. They are trying to be PC, and nowadays being PC is supporting Palestinians, and apparently like queer people for Hamas or for Palestine, and it's disgusting to me. So I completely agree with Pam that what you're doing, talking to students, is like of the utmost importance. So we shouldn't care that Harvard is sucking right now. Plus that this was before the war. Mark, I see you have a question. If you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Ilana. So, Daniel, thanks for this very good talk. I really appreciate it. I was particularly impressed with your interview on Russian television. I'm surprised that they didn't say, "Oh, we accidentally lost Daniel there."
Yeah.
You know,
That's what I was thinking.
I was surprised at that. So
Me too, actually.
And I think you're great at that, and that's great that that's your focus is on preaching not to the choir, and getting back around to that. So you said we're all kind of spokesmen, you know, which we are, and I've taught my kids, you know, if you're a Jew, you know, you kind of represent us, you know, so do that proudly and do that in a positive fashion. But there's also something to be said about preaching to the choir, because I believe the choir may be split. And I'm not going to say it outright, but there's a distinct possibility that the situation that happened on October 7th may not have, I'll say, be as bad. I'm not going to say wouldn't happen at all if a portion of the Israeli population hadn't been fighting with another portion of the population for the past year or so. So I'll quote, I'll paraphrase another recovering attorney, Ben Shapiro, who has said that there are certain people that you just, there's no point in having a conversation with them. So if you're talking to, you know, Rashid Tlaib or another member of the squad or somebody along those lines, you know, if they're just Jew haters, there's no convincing them otherwise. But perhaps a focus also could be on trying to get Jews to stick together. And I mean, that seems to me what's been a big problem recently. And there's, you know, a portion of Jews that are, I don't know how many, there's 85 people right now in this presentation. There's a section that are, you know, pro-Bibi. There's a portion that are kind of anti, you know, government. And I think that we may be our own worst enemy at some times, and that if we could try and stick together. Let's say, for instance, you know, these protests in the US, let's say all the Jews got together and said, okay, enough of this. We're going to go on strike. Every doctor, every teacher, every professor, every lawyer, we're going to have a day where we're not going to work and we're going to make a point. That would have an impact. You know, if you're trying to convince population, you know, people that are, you know, from BLM or otherwise, you know, that Israel doesn't target civilians and tries to do the right thing, you're never going to convince those people. You know, Roger Waters, you're never going to convince those people. So that's my comment there, and I'd like to hear your response. The other question I have, it's a very simple question actually, is the bomb shelters. So the sirens, there's a siren, and then there's the bomb shelters. Are you required to go to the bomb shelter, or is that an option?
All right, so I'll address your points in order. First of all, causality is a funny thing. It's hard to know if what would have been had Israel not had this much fighting. I know I had an interview on Arabic television. I had a simultaneous translation in my ear. I don't actually know Arabic. I wish I did. But one of the things they said is, well, you know, how is it possible that America is supporting Israel when, you know, everybody hates Bibi around the world? And my response was, well, you know, Israel is a democratic country. That means it's part of a family of democracies around the world. And democracies sometimes disagree and even argue or fight, but they're still family. And if there was anyone in the Arab world who thought that Israel would not have support simply because it had disagreements with other democracies, that was a significant mistake. But in terms of the word is that Hamas has been planning this with Iran for about 2 years now, which is longer than the amount of time the protests have been going on in Israel. I don't want to speculate on causality, but I do believe that you're right in that I think Israelis have gotten a harsh reminder of the fact that we're all in this together. And when this is over, we'll go back to quibbling and arguing and disagreeing, but I think we're going to do it with a very different kind of tone, because I think Israelis are going to remember that no matter how much we may disagree, we're a family, a dysfunctional family, but a family nonetheless. And that's very much the case. Pamela, do you want to jump in, or should I finish the?
Couple. Okay.
Yeah.
What, Pam? Pam? Oh, sorry, Pam. Go ahead. You can unmute yourself. Pam, I fixed it.
Okay. First of all, as far as I agree with everything Dan said. Yes, they were protesting and all of that, but as Dan said, this was in the planning for a long time before the protests began, before the new government started. And for those of you who are constantly watching I-24 News, as so many people are, by the way, if you don't have I-24, that would be the channel to watch that gives you probably the best coverage with the reporters in all the places, you know, unslanted coverage, but you know what's going on. But what was I going to say now? That's what happens when I say something else. Oh, as I-24 has shown, all of the people, whether you were a protester, whether you were not a protester, whether you were a protester against the protesters, which there were many of, they're all working together now, okay? They're all working together. You can look at centers where people are putting together packages, clothing and medical stuff and all the gear for the soldiers. You can look at places where they're helping the people from the south and now the people from the north who are starting to evacuate. And there are all kinds of people. The protesters, the heads of the protest movement are right there packaging things for the IDF. Okay, they're right there. Every single reservist has shown up for duty. They're not staying at home because they said they weren't going to serve. All the pilots, even though there was the big protest movement of the pilots who said they weren't going to fly their planes. All the doctors, when you heard that so many doctors were going to leave the country and everything, the doctors are working 24/7. All the people in the Navy, and there were plenty of protesters in the Navy, they all went to work to help. They all went back to their Miluim, their reserve duty, if they were called, and they're all helping right now. So as Dan said, maybe after the war is over, when we get back to governmental things and political things, then again, we will have our protest movements, but it probably will be different. And the other part to that question, I don't know if you were going to answer that, Dan, about
well, there's a question about bomb shelters.
Oh.
As far as I know, you're not legally required to go to a bomb shelter, and even if you were, when the sirens are going off, police aren't exactly going around handing out tickets. But this is an area where people don't screw around. And in prior wars, there were people who, instead of going to the bomb shelter, would stand out and do Iron Dome selfies, taking pictures of the Iron Dome and showing it doing its thing. I haven't seen Iron Dome selfies anymore because people are just not screwing around this time. So, you know, it's one of those things like when a tornado comes, do you really have to go down to your basement? Well, you don't have to. The other option is to stand in the path of a tornado. So
many people don't go down to the shelter. Well, first of all, there are still many buildings, many apartment buildings and many homes that do not have shelters. So in apartment buildings where there are no shelters, or where the shelters are maybe, like in my building, I'm on the second floor. There are people in the third floor and the fourth floor. The shelter is all the way down on the ground. There are people that are older and don't go all the way down the stairs. You don't want to be in an elevator, first of all. So there are people that don't go all the stairs. So what you do is you go into the hallways, into the stairwells, and you're, you know, protected there. So, and again, as Dan said, I mean, who's going to come and get me if I don't go down to my shelter? So,
what's your impression on the Haredi community? Apparently, they've gotten a little change of heart.
Well, there's a question related to that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I just want to add that on. Glauco saying,